Today on CityCast Nashville, we're diving into one of the city's most pressing issues, the affordable housing crisis and the complex zoning codes that shape our built environment. Greg Claxton from the Metro Planning Department joins us to dig into our city's zoning history, trends, and growth, and helps us understand what Nashville needs to do next. It's Monday, April 14th. I'm your host, Marie Cecil Anderson, and this is what Nashville's talking about. Your department was asked to take a look at housing and infrastructure in Nashville in the wake of the heated discussion of bills proposed at Metro Council last year that were designed to relax some building rules and codes in order to quickly create different types of housing. What questions were you asked to answer and research?
Council asked us about a year ago with a resolution to work with other Metro departments to kind of understand four big things. One, do our current regulations and does our current code negatively affect housing supply, affordability, and equity? Then second, what are the costs to deliver the kind of homes that people need for Nashville's existing and long-term affordability needs? And then as we think about sort of building out that level of housing, is our current infrastructure adequate to support kind of the level of growth we expect over the next 10 years? And then four, is there additional funding needed to ensure that planned infrastructure improvements are built?
So what did you find out?
A couple things. We've released some preliminary findings. There's a lot of work, especially in the infrastructure side, that's still ongoing. But I would say that the key things that we found is that we've got a very, very complex zoning code. And the complexity of that partly comes down to the fact that it's really hard to know what is going to get built in any one location. So there's a lot of sort of one and two family zoning districts. We call those the R and the RS districts that can allow like very unexpectedly large structures. So people think like their zoning is sort of tied to what's built around them. But if something gets torn down, it can be built much, much larger in a lot of cases.
Can you give examples of those neighborhoods?
Really anywhere in the urban core, 12 South, a lot of kind of Inglewood or East Nashville, Green Hills, anywhere where you've seen a lot of tear down activity and rebuilding, like those often come in like just surprisingly large, whether it's one building that's coming in or two, it's just a lot larger than people expect. I think a lot of folks are kind of nervous about any changes to zoning, thinking that it's going to open up a lot of building like that. And then the flip side is, as you shift into zoning districts that allow density, such as our multifamily districts, it's tough to know what you're going to get out of that. A lot of places you can build a lot more than you expect, but you don't actually get a whole lot of housing units out of it. So it's kind of this worst of both worlds. And so we've added on lots and lots of other things that are kind of band-aids. We call them overlays or specific plan zoning that give people a greater expectation for what's going to be built, but it adds to the complexity. We wind up with kind of a lot of large one and two family homes and a lot of very dense housing in downtown and midtown. And there's like a gap of stuff in between that's kind of middle scale or moderately scaled housing that's more or less compatible with existing neighborhoods, but comes in at a lower cost than most of what we're building now.
And so your report issued recommendations. What do we need to build to fix this?
There's a couple things that we're going to bring forward in June, and then there's some work that we're going to keep going and working on past June. And so in June, we expect to make recommendations for revising the bulk standards, like that's kind of the height or how much building you can build on a piece of property for current zoning districts. That's to get them like what you can do under your current zoning, get that a little closer to what people expect. Then we also expect to recommend creating new zoning districts specifically for this kind of moderate density stuff. That might be cottage courts where you've got small single family homes around a common open space, 3 and 4 plexes, that kind of thing. And then also recommendations for a bonus program where people may be able to get like a little bit more height in exchange for including some affordable units. That's something the state allowed us to do last year. Looking beyond June, we also expect later this year to continue working with the community to develop recommendations for changing the zoning map to allow those new districts to be used. Over the next couple of years, we'll be working on a countywide ecological conservation plan, like understanding from an ecological perspective where we want to preserve And then also an update to the 1998 preservation plan. So understanding from a historical preservation perspective, kind of a more up-to-date understanding of what we want to preserve.
So you're pretty busy, it sounds.
There's a lot going on, but it's
going on.
a lot of these things touch other parts of the department. So it's not just me. I'm just
Okay.
talking this part of it.
Okay, amazing. You were just talking about our missing middle housing, like courtyard buildings you mentioned. What types of people does that kind of housing typically serve?
When these are built new, they're a little bit more affordable than the other things that we're building in the same locations. Those larger single family homes or denser multifamily. But really, like we've got examples of these in a lot of different parts of Nashville today. So down the street from me, there's a sixplex, like 6 units in one building that just fits in with the other houses around it. That can be a really affordable option. Like if it's kind of people living on their own or living with roommates, these cottage courts can be a great place as either a starter home or for a young family who wants access to that open space. Or, if you've got seniors who are empty nesters, like they've raised kids, they've moved on, they're looking to downsize, a lot of these fit them as well. So it's really, I think it gives people a better set of options for figuring out what housing works for them. Like what is the trade-off that they're willing to make between a yard versus shared open space versus being close to transit or shops to walk to, that kind of thing. So it's really, I think it's a set of forms that can work for a broad array of people. The critical part is, do we have enough of the housing so that the pressure to raise rents and that kind of thing is eased a little bit?
I think you just described where I live right now. There's a courtyard, there's 46 units around,
Mm-hmm.
and I personally, to tell you a little bit more about me, I really wanted to buy a house, but really couldn't afford. But luckily, there's this middle housing option for myself. So I'm very grateful for that. Would you tell us what Nashville Next is and how does it play into this?
Nashville Next is the county's long-range general plan. It captures kind of all of the policies around growth and preservation that guides the planning department. It was adopted first in 2015 and then updated since then. It's also, your listeners may have heard of our community plans or community character policy. That's all part of Nashville Next. So it kind of provides both a broad countywide vision of how we grow, where we preserve, kind of how we manage change, as well as these more detailed kind of community plans that get a little bit more specific and say, like, on this corridor, the future character of this is like a mixed use corridor or a residential corridor.
Gotcha.
On the growth side of that, like as we think about this housing and infrastructure study, kind of the vision it lays out is that we've got areas that are kind of dense and walkable mixed use activity centers. And so that could be downtown and midtown for sure, but the area around Global Mall, the area around Madison Town Center, the Green Hills Mall, where the idea is that over time, we've got services there, we've got amenities like grocery stores and shops, we've got libraries, and over time, we want to see housing added to that to create complete communities. And that all of these are linked together with transit that's frequent enough that you don't have to plan your day around it. You just walk out the door, hop on the bus, and get to where you're going. And so there's an alignment between Nashville Next, the Choose How You Move transit referendum. And then, what we're looking to do now is see, well, what can we do to sort of add just enough housing spread across different parts of the county, linked in this way so that all of these pieces fit together to create the kind of complete communities Nashvilleians are looking for.
Well, so your study also talks a lot about affordability and equity.
Mm-hmm.
How does the ability to buy a house in Nashville change depending on your race?
One of the things that we took a look at is using a census geography called a block group. That's basically a neighborhood. Like from 2023 and 2024, what were the typical home prices in each neighborhood in Nashville? We kind of compared that to different levels of family income. And so just the typical family across all of Davidson County earns about $100,000 a year in 2023. Based on that income, with a very rough measure, we think that family can afford the typical home in under 10% of Nashville neighborhoods. If you earn double that, you can earn the typical home in about 3/4 of Nashville neighborhoods. If we look at that by race, it gets really, really stark. So the typical white or the typical Asian family can afford the typical home in under 1/3 of these neighborhoods. While for the typical Black family or the typical Hispanic family, that's down to under 1%. So there's kind of two big takeaways for me. One is everyone is having trouble affording a home in Nashville today, like the last couple of years. It's really, really dramatic. And if you take a look at those Black and Hispanic families, it is really, really severe. Like the access that they have to home ownership today is just really, really restricted. And that has a whole range of issues for kind of people's ongoing affordability and for their ability to sort of develop and build and pass on intergenerational wealth. I mean, home ownership is really a gateway to being able to pass on to your kids kind of the wealth that they can use to get their lives started.
Hi, I'm David Plotz, the CEO of CityCast. We've all set health goals: lose weight, exercise more, eat better. But without a plan, those goals often fade. That may have happened to you. It has definitely happened to me. And that's where Prolon comes in. Prolon's 5-day fasting mimicking diet gives you a science-backed, structured approach to stay on track and see real results. And now Prolon is upping their game with the new Next Gen 5-day program, delivering the same science-backed benefits in a cleaner, more convenient, and more flavorful format. Prolon is a plant-based nutrition program featuring soups, snacks, and beverages designed to nourish the body while keeping it in a fasting state, triggering cellular rejuvenation and renewal. Next Gen builds on the original Prolon with 100% organic soups and teas, a richer taste, and ready-to-eat meals. Developed over decades at USC's Longevity Institute and backed by top U.S. medical centers, Prolon has been shown to support biological age reduction, metabolic health, skin appearance, fat loss, and energy. I've been doing the 5-day program, and I feel so much better. I really enjoy the tasty energy bars, the snacks and soups, and the fact that I can enjoy meals, even though the calorie count is super low. The flavors and textures are excellent. An olive oil snack here, broccoli and quinoa soup there, hibiscus tea, a yummy nut bar. It's got the benefits of a 5-day fast, but doesn't have the challenge of doing it with pure liquids. It's a system reset. And also, I know this sounds funny, but it's not. The packaging and directions are fantastic, clear, and well organized and thoughtful. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolon is offering CityCast listeners 15% off site-wide, plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/city. That's PROLONLIFE.com/city to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/city.
Well, in your report, you mentioned the 1930s census. What did that reveal about Nashville's early zoning plan?
We took a look back, like we wanted to provide a little bit of historical context for where some of these disparities come from. And there's a lot of different things that have gone into that over the decades. But one of the things that has shaped that is Nashville's first zoning code, which was adopted in 1933. And so we took a look at that, at the patterns of kind of where the zoning was for lower density housing and where the zoning was for higher density housing. And then we had a unique opportunity because sociologists at Fisk and at Vanderbilt worked with the Census Bureau in 1930 to draw census tracts. And that's like a very dull, boring thing, except that we were the first city in the South to have those. And what that means is we can take a look at the zoning map on the one hand, and then census data at the census tract level to see kind of where the white population is, where the Black population is, and how the zones were mapped differently for those two groups. And so what we found was the lowest density housing was mapped overwhelmingly for majority white tracts, whereas the densest zoning, as well as industrial zoning districts, were overwhelmingly mapped to majority Black tracts. And so we see, even going back to 1930, some very sharp disparities in how zoning was applied to different communities. We think that's an important thing to think about for kind of the historical context for where we are today, even though today's map is actually quite a bit different in a way that surprised us.
What did you find surprising?
So in looking at today's zoning code and zoning map in 2024 and comparing that with the 2020 census, what we found, if you just look at single family zoning, that's our RS districts for folks who are used to working with our zoning code, census tracts without a majority race or ethnicity. So these very diverse tracts in areas like Antioch or along Nolensville Pike or up in Madison, census tracts that are majority Hispanic and census tracts that are majority Black are more likely to have single family zoning than majority white tracts. Now there's fewer of them, so there's still a lot of single family zoning in these majority white neighborhoods, but that was just a surprise to us. Like when people think about exclusionary zoning, if they've read The Color of Law, that is a surprising outcome. And so we've shared that in the report just to say that like making a broad brush change to RS zoning, which other cities across the country have started doing, we think that's going to have unanticipated consequences for communities of color, parts of town like Bordeaux or Parkwood, or like I said, further down Newlandsville Pike or up Murfreesboro Pike. And that's part of why we come back to Nashville next and say, well, let's focus along those transit corridors. Let's focus into those centers so that it's kind of shared equally, but it doesn't sort of change wholesale kind of the expectations in all of these different neighborhoods.
North Nashville is getting slammed by gentrification right now. Is that what would happen in these other places if we took that broad brush approach?
Yeah, I think we're concerned that making broad brush changes could fuel gentrification, in part because it's not tailored to the incomes in the area. It's not tailored to kind of our overall level of need for housing that we expect over the next 10 or 20 years. And it's not tied to kind of the attainability levels of different housing types. There's just a lot that kind of goes into that. And so our recommendation there is just to be a little bit more cautious, recognizing that a lot of housing change has happened in neighborhoods throughout Nashville, even under existing zoning, that has had a lot of unanticipated consequences.
The Nashville Scene recently ran a piece on the history of development in Belmont Hillsborough. That's such a coveted place to live, and historically, it was a very inclusive neighborhood that stayed diverse into the 70s. Now it's not at all. Why do you think so?
I mean, I think the big thing that is driving a lot of change in Nashville, in Belmont Hillsborough, and in a lot of other places, is that we've had this big shift in the housing market. When Belmont Hillsborough neighbors were sort of, the group was first put together, we saw a lot of disinvestment in the urban core. Like there was a lot of pressure for folks to sort of spread out as much as they could. And over the past 10 or 20 years in Nashville and in cities across the country, there's been a lot of rekindled interest in being close to the urban core. And so it's put a lot of demand to be back in Nashville. Anywhere where you've got like a sudden influx of folks, a lot of increased demand, and a much higher income base, which is something we've also seen over the past 10 years, I think you're going to see pressure for home values to go up. And that creates kind of this filtering effect of folks getting, I mean, I don't know that I would say displaced from Belmont Hillsborough, but like as folks sell, as new folks come in, they kind of bid up the price of housing. And so kind of the overall affordability of a neighborhood like that kind of really, really declines. Supply can help with that. It's a slow fix, but we've traditionally taken a pretty hands-off approach within a lot of urban core neighborhoods, trying to think through how do the pieces fit together a little bit better is part of what we're trying to understand with this study.
Well, speaking of supply, the Scene said in the article, although more than 1 million square feet of residential floor space has been added, Belmont Hillsborough is down just one housing unit from where it was in 2010. So it seems like there's so much construction going on all the time in Nashville. Why is it still not enough?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's something like as a planner, as someone who takes sort of the housing market seriously, it's something I grapple with a lot because, there are a lot of cities that are experiencing a housing crisis right now. And the reason is they don't build very much housing. That is not Nashville. Like Nashville builds a lot of housing. And so I think part of what's going on is we've enabled a lot of construction, especially in downtown and midtown, that is just more expensive. We've also allowed it a lot on our pikes, like the major corridors coming into and out of downtown. And so in all of those places, you go to a much higher level of density, and that construction type is just inherently more expensive. Like the cost to build a parking garage is really, really expensive. At the same time, you're also competing with office buildings in downtown, hotels in downtown and midtown, commercial areas along our pikes. And so all of that drives up the cost of land, which drives up the cost of housing. Generally, I think what we've seen is our rental market has responded a little bit better. And that's because I think in part, rentals work better with density. Most of the housing in downtown and midtown and on the pikes are rentals. Where we've really seen like just a really dramatic undersupply that's not really turning the corner yet is on the ownership side. And so that's part of what we're going to be working on is thinking through like how do these middle housing types, like that cottage court, like that townhome court, like how can those work better to provide a little bit more of that supply for the ownership side and start bringing kind of the cost to buy a home down a little bit.
Do you think Nashville is segregated?
I think there are parts of Nashville that are segregated. I think there is a lot of Nashville that is not segregated. And I think a lot of that is in our suburban areas. So like those non-majority neighborhoods, those seem to be sustaining their integration in a way that I think would have been surprising 30 years ago. And I think that's a really positive story and worth thinking about.
The Vanderbilt University poll that just came out shows pretty clearly that the higher someone's income gets, the less they support housing density. Why do you think that is?
I think people are reasonably concerned about density or just change in general for a variety of reasons. Some of that has to do with the housing itself. Some of it has to do with infrastructure and transportation. I think all of that is very standard, and that's stuff we work through with every community when we go out and do a plan or a planning process. Broadly, folks with higher incomes are probably a little bit more insulated from the housing market. And so, both by the level of income, but also like one of the quirks, and there's lots of quirks in thinking about housing. One of the quirks of home ownership is if you're a new home buyer midway through like your career path, you've got a fixed rate mortgage. What is generally going to happen is your income is going to go up bit by bit by bit over a year, even if you're just keeping up with inflation. Your fixed rate mortgage is going to stay the same. And so your home actually becomes a little bit more affordable year by year by year for you. And so I think that's another way in which higher income households are often buffered from changes in the housing market. Like if you bought your home in 2010, your payments are just in a completely different world than someone who is looking to buy a home today.
Yes, I'm very jealous of those people. Yeah, a lot of big feelings around all this. And honestly, it can be a little confusing. It seems like people who can't afford a house are really upset, but the people who already own homes are even angrier, as you could see, if you watch some of those videos of public comment. They're so mad by the attempt to build more houses in their neighborhoods. I grew up in Oak Hill in the 80s, and my neighbors' homes around are just unrecognizable. How can we help people who have lived in these neighborhoods for generations to understand the character of their neighborhood must change in order to provide affordable housing for everyone?
I'm going to give like 3 caveats.
Love it.
First is that Oak Hill is a satellite city.
Yes,
so they are actually
true.
Not affected by what we're doing.
Okay, yeah.
but
I think my mom loves that. Which is something
But
else.
more broadly, I think one of the things that we've seen, both in like gentrifying neighborhoods, like we were talking about earlier, but also some higher end, wealthier neighborhoods, is that the housing doesn't have to change for the community to change. And so anytime like I've ever heard someone saying, well, we moved in 10 or 15 years ago, but I couldn't afford to buy today. Like that's what's going on. Like their home may not have been rebuilt, but it is much more expensive. And then the other piece is, I don't think it's the case that we have to like fully change the character of all of the neighborhoods in Nashville to get housing affordability more under control. Part of what we're doing is sort of taking a narrow strategic approach, centers and corridors, but part of it is also like the middle housing types is getting homes that are a little bit more in character, that are a little bit more in scale, and where everyone knows what's going to be produced out of it in a way that they don't under our current zoning districts. And so I think those two pieces together is our approach to sort of try to address and balance both sides. Like we've got a housing crisis, we've got to address that. But we've also got a lot of people who are very concerned about what does it mean to change zoning in their neighborhood or near their neighborhood.
Right.
And so we want to kind of work on both pieces of that, as well as address the infrastructure side. Ultimately, though, I think your question is one of values. If you're insulated from changes in the housing market, like what is meaningful to hear for that? There's only so far I as a bureaucrat can go. Like I can do stats, I can do history, I can do analysis, but like a lot of that is just having conversations with your parents and their neighbors and explaining like, I grew up here, I am of this community. and I can't afford to live here. We had a meeting in Edmondson Pike a couple weeks ago, and we had a gentleman who grew up down there and told everyone in the room that. And it was really powerful to hear. Like, a lot of folks came in like, what are you going to do to my house? What are you going to do to my neighborhood? And hearing, hey, I'm from here. I need to find a place to live. I would like to be an owner like my parents were. That's powerful. And that's not something I can do. That's not something the planning department can do.
Well, even as my mom gets older, it's like, well, we'd like to sell the house, but then we can't even afford a house to stay in the neighborhood.
Yep, absolutely. A lot of people are locked up like that.
You just hosted a bunch of open meetings about all of this. Besides those powerful words from the guy at the Edmondson Pike meeting, what other feedback have you heard?
We did 2 rounds of work. First was in March, where we kind of went around the county and just kind of introduced the study to people. The second thing that we did over the last 2 weeks is, once we put our preliminary findings out, we had these office hours. And the idea here isn't we're going to go out and have like broad ranging discussions with a whole bunch of people, but we want to, for the folks who are really deeply engaged, we want to give them an opportunity to sort of come in and talk through kind of what they're seeing, what they have questions about, what they have concerns about, and just kind of help them understand what's in there and why. So we've heard both, I would say, concerns about kind of the level of demand and why we expect demand to be that high in Nashville, especially around kind of changes in household size. Like, we've got a lot more people living alone than we used to. But on the flip side, we also heard concerns about, well, you're saying you've got this narrow kind of centers and corridors focused approach. Does that mean that we're consigning anybody who wants to buy a house to living close to a highly polluted corridor? And so it's like, it's our opportunity to talk about kind of wherever you're coming at it from. We want to kind of talk through and hear what you're seeing, what your hopes are, what your concerns are. And that'll help us think about kind of the next couple of months as well.
What are the risks if we don't change our current approach to housing development here in Nashville?
I think it comes down to, it's sort of more of the same. I mean, we've had a huge shift in our housing market the last 10 years. If that continues going, I think we'd expect to see a lot of new production. I think we'd expect to see a lot of frustration with the rezoning process. I think we expect to see a lot of frustration with building outcomes, but still kind of struggling to be the kind of affordable place that Nashville has traditionally been. I think that in and of itself threatens our identity, like the ability to come here and try to break into music or, become the first generation to be a doctor. I mean, like, there's a lot of stories that are tied to people moving here because it's affordable and because they can kind of get their break. That's a big loss to Nashville.
If people miss those meetings, can they still get in touch and give their feedback?
Absolutely. We've got an extensive website at engage.nashville.gov/housing and infrastructure, all one word. You can get the report, a shorter executive summary, lots and lots of background materials. You can always email us with questions, with comments. And then we are looking ahead to further community meetings in May, looking specifically at the middle housing types and kind of what draft standards we might consider putting in the zoning code. So people can get a really good sense of, hey, you say cottage court, like, what does that mean? How much open space? How big are the homes? Hey, you say a fourplex, like, what does that mean? Like, what kind of lot does that fit on?
Well, listeners at home, you're hearing this right now, so you can use your voice. You can ask your questions. Don't come to us later when you're mad, because you have the opportunity now for your voice to be heard. Greg, this has been really educational. Thank you for what you're doing for our city. I know you're just trying to make it as inclusive and great as possible, so thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
That's all for today here on CityCast Nashville. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell your friends? Rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our Hey Nashville newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Toodles.